It's our NFBC episode. On tonight's show, we'll talk about how the NFBC got started, debate some of its format choices, and give some strategy tips. Oh wait, we went right to the top, because joining us on the show is none other than the head of the NFBC, Greg Ambrosius himself, to talk about all of these topics. You don't want to miss this show. Beat the Shift is up next. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast, presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, Ruvain Guy. What's going on, Ruvain?
Not much. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. My God, this softball dominance continues. I just can't believe it, Ruvain. I have now thrown, in the last 4 games in my night league, shutouts. 4 shutouts in a row, 5 overall, counting my Sunday league. I have a 36 consecutive scoreless inning streak. I'm telling you, man, it's gone crazy. Something's got to give soon, but I'm enjoying it while it lasts.
Well, maybe the Mets can use you in their bullpen, because right now their bullpen's in shambles and they can't get anybody out. So they do need a closer, even though the closer right now pitched in Brooklyn this evening, actually. But they do need some bullpen help, and maybe they can use you.
Uncle Steve, if you're listening, you know who to call. Well, we've got a great show today. We're going to talk a lot about the NFBC, and, well, we thought, why don't we bring the guy from the NFBC? Joining us is Greg Ambrosius of the NFBC. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks for having me, Ariel. And yeah, I think I want to draft you in some of my NFBC leagues. Holy cow, 36 innings in a row. Sign me up for you.
That is crazy. This is softball, and, we're not talking like a run environment where people are scoring 2-3 runs. Like, the average run scored is like 7.5 runs per game, so
yeah.
Crushing it. So there we go. But enough about me. Let's talk about you, a little bit of history. How did you get started with fantasy sports, personally, and how did you get the NFBC started?
Yeah, it's a long story, but I hope you find it enjoyable. I'm going to tell it to you. I'm so old. I was in college in the late 1970s, and in the dorm room that I was at, these guys had an APBA league where they'd roll the dice every night, right? And we were radio and TV majors, so they would act like Harry Carey, right? 3-6. Home run, and this, how they were preparing for play-by-play, if you will. And this is going on in the halls every night. And we eventually had Stratomatic, and I joined a Stratomatic league where we actually just laid all the cards out and we drafted the cards, right? We were ahead of rotisserie before there was rotisserie. We were drafting actual cards, forming our league, rolling the dice every night, drinking beer and having a blast. And so I graduated from college, went on to be a newspaper sports editor for 7 years, and somebody picked up the book, Rotisserie League Baseball, the official rule book, in 1986 and said, holy cow, look at this. We get together once a year, drink at a bar, draft our teams, and compete just like we were when we were rolling the dice with APBA and Stratomatic. We said, let's do it. Got together at a bar in 86, drafted our baseball teams, had a blast, decided let's do fantasy football as well. My good buddy from college was the general manager of the Beloit Brewers. It was a Class A Midwest League team. We took batting practice in the afternoon, drank all night, drafted the next morning. So all of a sudden, in 86, 87, I'm doing fantasy baseball, fantasy football. 1989, there's an ad in the Green Bay Press-Gazette looking for an editor of the first rotisserie baseball magazine. I'm like, this is unbelievable. I've been playing for 3 years, and I've always wanted a magazine that was catered to this, because in our days, you guys don't even know this, but you would just buy like the Sporting News, write down the second baseman from each team and make your own rankings, because there was nothing out there, really. And so I applied for the job. I was the last person to interview out of 6 people. They asked me if I had played fantasy baseball before. I said, heck yeah, since 86. Like, oh my God, this guy's got so much experience. He's been playing for 3 years. By the time I got home, they hired me. And so I became the first editor of Fantasy Baseball magazine in 1989. We went to press. I think the first issue was January 1990. And Fantasy Baseball magazine published 6 times that year, published 4 times every year after that. And honestly, Fantasy Baseball was a very important magazine. I was also the editor of Baseball Cards magazine in the 1990s when baseball cards just went wild. So I was in both industries, just doing great. And then, of course, the internet came, and it really made it tough for magazines to survive. By 2002, Baseball Cards magazine went under. I was still writing for Sports Collectors Digest and Tough Stuff, but the magazine I was editing was going under, and I thought, oh my goodness, I may be out of a job pretty soon. How long is Fantasy Sports Magazine going to last now with the environment we were in? And so there was a high stakes fantasy football contest called the World Championship of Fantasy Football that was being held in Las Vegas in 2002. I didn't have any teams. I went out there. They had a $200,000 grand prize. Everybody drafted once. I thought this is going to be the biggest bust in our industry's history. I get out there, 552 teams all drafting at once at
Wow.
MGM Grand in Las Vegas. There were over 900 people there with co-managers, everybody wearing jerseys, everybody just loving it. They were late opening the doors. When they opened the doors, people went crazy. The guy in front of me goes, "This is the effing Super Bowl of fantasy football." And I'm right behind him going, "You're effing right it is." I was just amazed. I had been in this industry 13 years and never imagined anything like this. And so at the break, after round 10, I came up to Emil Cadillac and I said, "Emil, this is unbelievable. I could do this in baseball. I have such a reputation in baseball. I was freelance writing. I was the first fantasy baseball writer on ESPN.com in 1995-96, and I was still writing at that time. So I had a good platform for baseball." And he's like, let me get through this. We tried to work together. It just didn't work out. A lot of it was on our company side. They weren't convinced this would be a good idea. And so we never partnered together, but in 2004, I created the National Fantasy Baseball Championship. They were the World Championship of Fantasy Football. I thought, if you don't want to work with me, I'll just call it the National Fantasy Baseball Championship. And that's when we got started. And I can tell you about the NFBC and how we became 15 teams and such. But, it's kind of a long history. But here now, NFBC is in its 21st year. And when I started this in 2004, to imagine where we are today is just unfathomable. I mean, the first year we had 236 teams. This year we had almost 23,000 baseball teams. We had over 22,000 football teams last year. We were going to give away over $11 million in prize money this year. I never would have dreamed what this has become, but I'm very proud of it. And it's been 21 fun years. After being a writer, I'm no longer a writer. I'm just a game operator, Errol.
Well, what do you think makes NFBC stand apart from the rest of the other platforms out there?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is we started the 15-team format, right? I mean, there was no 15-team mixed league format that anybody played ever before the NFBC, right? I mean, that's just the truth. And how did I ever come up with it? Well, when I went to WCOFF, they had 12-team leagues, and I thought that was kind of cool. But for baseball, as you guys know, the founding fathers created, really it would be AL only and NL only, right? They were going to make it very tough where you had stars and scrubs and you had everything that a major league team was trying to put together. And so that would have been a 12-team AL only or NL only. Well, that wouldn't have been a mass-produced game, I didn't think. So I felt I really had to have mixed leagues. And I didn't want to do a 12-team mixed league because that would be too easy, I felt. So what number do I come up with? So I was out at the Arizona Fall League Symposium in 2003, and I was talking, actually 2002, and I was talking with Charlie Wiegert, who ran CDM Fantasy Sports. He goes, "Go 14 teams. That'd be a little tougher." And John Zaleski was with Ultimate Fantasy Sports, and I was with him, and he liked 16 teams. And he's like, "Go 16 teams." And so I get on the flight, and I start writing all the rules down, and I'm thinking, 15 teams. I mean, there's 30 team MLB teams. Let's get half the player pool, and that'll be tough, but not too tough. And so that's why I created a 5x5, 15-team format. The first year we only had 29 players, which was only 6 bench spots with no DL. And so that was a little bit too thin. The next year there was recommendation to go to 30 players per team, and so we did. But we started out with 15 teams, 29, and we tried to make it tough. but not so tough that the average baseball fan would join us. So as far as the NFBC, we then in 2009 created the 12-team mixed team format, which is very, very popular. 2,756 teams this year in that RotoWire Online Championship. We created the 10-team cut line format. We have Fab Leagues. We've got best ball leagues. I don't think anybody has best ball, baseball leagues like we have. We have draft and hold leagues. So we really wanted to have the whole format under our umbrella. In 2009, the World Championship of Fantasy Baseball decided to compete with us with a $200,000 grand prize, and they did it at a 14-team format. It did not go over. 2 years, they lost a lot of money, and eventually they went bankrupt after that. And so at that point was when I was like, all right, I'm going to do 15-team, 12-team, 10-team, whatever it is. I'm going to try to keep as much competition away from me as possible, and I'm going to create the games first. And if people want to copy me, they can. But that's really the game format that we have for the NFBC. As far as the software, I mean, we were with StatsInc for many years, and it was on a very old platform. In fact, so old they could not really write new code for it, and they didn't own us. We were actually hired them. They eventually owned us in 2011, but they didn't put any money back into the software. And so when we went to Sports Hub Technology before the 2017 season, we actually took a full year to write all of the format from the draft software to Fab and everything else. And right now, I don't think there's any question. We have the best tech platform in the industry. Our Fab is, without doubt, second to none. Our draft room is very, very good. We could use a native app that's coming down the pike. But, yeah, I think technically we now have everything. We certainly weren't proud of our platform in the early years, but these last 6 years have just been fantastic. Our platform is very, very good.
And you mentioned a whole bunch of different types of baseball formats that you have. You have the RotoWire Online, you have the main event, Draft Champions, Cut Line, you have all these formats. Which is your favorite format? And have auctions, me and Ario do a lot of auctions, have auctions become more popular recently?
Yeah, I mean, the auctions is how the industry started, right? I mean, the founding fathers had auctions for players, and you auctioned off the players, and that was the beauty of it. And $260 in baseball became the format. It's just that auctions are so hard to do and so long to do that it didn't take off like a draft format did, right? So the first year we started with the 235 teams, we had 13 main events, and we had 3 auction leagues, and they were 2 AL only, and then there was 1 NL only. Well, that AL only and NL only just could only grow for so long and so far. We really had like 2 leagues in Vegas, may have grown to 3 leagues, 2 leagues in New York, 2 leagues in Chicago, then down to 1. It just wasn't going to grow. So when we started the mixed team format, so now, okay, let's go 15 teams, mixed league, $260, and let's have an overall prize there as well. We started that about 14, 15 years ago. That became very popular. But again, you could only do it online. The software wasn't good enough to do it online. I mean, we could only do it live. The software wasn't good enough to do online. Now we have auction software that's really, really good. You can do high dollar leagues online. We do a lot of $150 online auction championship. That one has a $15,000 grand prize. Right now our live one has a $30,000 grand prize. Auctions are very popular right now. They'll never get as popular as drafts. They take a long time, and you got to really know your stuff when you get into them. But the auctions are, without doubt, gaining popularity. Football's the same way. Our online auction software is very popular, and that's gaining popularity. You know, my favorite format, certainly the auctions. I mean, no doubt. We do a $50 auction with Tom and Jeff and myself and 12 NFBC guys. And when I'm done with that, I'm like, let's do another one. I mean, you're in on every single player, right? You want Acuna? Pay for him. You want Strider? Pay for him. You're in on every single player. And it's just the most fun. And I know you guys know that as well. But it is just the most fun. But at this point, like if I was to retire and play in the NFBC, I'd probably play Draft Champions. I can't compete with the Fab. Like the veterans right now are so good at it. For me, I would draft 50 players. I love that format. You just start players differently each week. But boy, I love the Draft Champions format. And this year, I believe we topped 5,000 teams for the Draft Champions National Championship. So that's how popular that one is. But those are the two favorite formats for myself.
Well, all incredible stuff, and Ruben and I have been playing in the NFBC for some 10 years, doing bunch of auctions. I mean, we were doing the auction championship when it was at the Hilton in New York City. I remember we finished maybe 9th overall. We won the league that year. I mean, that the NFBC really is how I got into the industry. We were in the same league as a bunch of Fangraphs writers, and we were chatting, and next thing I know, we got the ATC projections up at Fangraphs. So,
Nice.
So there you go. So I do have a couple of questions about the format, and nothing to slide about you, just my questions because, we obviously have listeners that play in all different kinds of formats, in home leagues and on Yahoo, CBS with, different things. So I just want to talk to you about sort of some of the, I guess, decisions in terms of the formats and maybe provide some counterpoint to you, which I'm sure you have the right answer for. So, over the past couple of years as a fantasy community, we have thought, and I know you're part of the community as well, we've thought about making some changes, like replacing batting average with on-base percentage, maybe even getting rid of the wins category or supplementing them with quality starts, adding holds to saves category, maybe even adding in innings pitched. Have you, the NFBC, considered any of these a little bit more non-standard or customizable formats?
Well, I mean, these are brought up probably every year by people that ask if we would consider doing it. And, I'll just give you the on-base percentage versus batting average. I think on-base percentage makes the most sense. We're not accounting for walks in the NFBC right now, right? And so why are you mad at your guy to get a walk? I mean, he can score a run, but we're not taking that into consideration. So I don't think that's good. That being said, the majority of rotisserie players are still playing batting average. I mean, Tout Wars changed to OBP has to be 12 to 15 years ago, if not longer. And nobody else has really followed suit. And so I'm not sure that all of our guys would like that one. The wins, the saves, if we change our rules to the way the game is changing every single time it changed, we would be, outlawing stolen bases because there's too few and now there's too many, that kind of thing. So, no, I think the NFBC has a 21-year history. We have records in each of the categories for each of the contests, and we keep track of all of that. So I think it would be very hard for the NFBC to change on these 5x5 formats. I understand the reasoning for it. And again, I do think OBP, if any of the categories would change, it would be OBP from batting average.
Yeah, that's the easiest to just
Yeah, because we're just not taking into account the walks, right? And so the wins, they're very tough to get, and it's kind of a lucky category these days, as we know. Saves versus holds. Again, we're trying to appease our current players while still bringing in a whole lot of new players. And we can talk about that later, about how we're bringing in new players, because, there's a churn rate in the 15-team format, right? I mean, if you play the 15-team format for 3-4 years and you haven't cashed, you're probably getting out and only going to do the 12-team format. So how do we keep new people playing? And I don't think switching to these saves versus holds, quality starts, is going to appeal to more new players. So that's my answer, is I just don't think with our 21-year history that we'll be changing a lot of categories.
So it really sounds like you're a baseball purist at heart, not wanting to change these categories.
Well, I mean, again, I've been in this industry since 1989, so whether I'm old or a purist or whatever, I just don't think our contest is going to change to every whim. We're just kind of we are an older contest. Maybe there'd be a young contest. Operator goes, damn, that Ambrosius is so old, I'm going to start up one with OBP and quality stays and ace holds, and you just watch everybody come to me. I just don't think that's, the rules are the big part, obviously, but the software and do you trust the guy you're giving your money to and all that kind of stuff is another factor. So, I think people know that I've been in this industry for 35 years, and I am a baseball guy at heart. I got my reputation in this industry for baseball, not football, and I understand where the players are coming from. I'm one of you guys, But changing the rules each year is just not what I'm in for.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of this is business decision. Obviously, if you see that it's going well, you're not going to change it. Obviously. But some of the questions I might have are more of sort of what led you to that decision, I would say. One thing that comes up, and we talk a lot about on the show recommending fab pickups, and also we talk a lot about the strategy of how much money to bid on fab. What prospects in the NFBC? You cannot pick up a prospect unless they are called to the majors, or if you've drafted him preseason, right? They're fresh and new. What is the reason that you set it up that way? Because the counter argument in terms of fairness to me is that it creates these fab frenzies, and to be honest, I don't actually like it. It requires that whoever has the most fab, somebody might have more fab because they were lucky with no injuries, right? You might have had your fab depleted because you had to spend it on injuries, or you're doing badly. It doesn't show as much knowledge of, I'm going to pick up Paul Skeens in week 2, get him away before and make the right timing of it. I'm just curious as to what I'm sure you have the right answer for it. Why did you
I'll
set
give
it
you
that
the
way?
answer, and you tell me if you thought about this beforehand, okay? So the reasons for not having prospects in the player pool is, one, if you thought Skeens was going to get called up in week 2 or week 3, you should have drafted him. Okay, so every single player is available to be drafted, not only to be drafted, but they're available in the week 1 free agent pool because before the start of the season, and the week 2 pool because the cuts aren't made until really that Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We get them in. We can't cut them off by that Sunday. So if you want any prospect, you've got actually 3 opportunities to draft them and put them on your roster. Now, if they're not drafted in your league, then they don't go into your league's free agent pool until they're called up to the majors. Now, why do we make that rule? Because in the early parts of the NFBC, there were sharper guys as owners compared to other people, right? I mean, it wasn't everybody like right now, man, NFBC is just sharp, sharp, sharp. And I didn't want our veterans to stash prospects a week or 2 before they got called up, and then when they got called up, having everybody in the league going, oh shit, I didn't know that I could pick him up, or I didn't know that I could stash him, or damn, I should have got him a week early. So I didn't want a stashing going on with the minor leaguers. When the minor leaguer gets called up in week 10, everybody has a chance to get at him in that league, just like everybody had the chance to draft him or pick him up in the first fab period, okay? And so that's why I feel it's a more level playing field for everybody, that once they get called up, not only do they have to get called up, they've got to play 1 game in the majors so that we know exactly that they're in the majors. And that's the rule. I mean, that's the reasoning. It was
But
really
that might have changed over time with the people's knowledge and all that, right? And certainly, whether that maybe is the right decision, it certainly leads to these fab frenzies, and
that's right. And again, if you wanted that guy bad enough, you should have drafted him or stashed him. Again, we only have 7 reserve spots and there's no DL. So stashing a guy is not easy, right? That's a big, valuable position that you're stashing a minor leaguer in there. And that's why a lot of the minor leaguers aren't drafted early on, because you might have to stash them for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, even longer. So when he gets called up, instead of having some veteran stash him a week before he gets called up, everybody's got the chance to get him. And you're right, that does lead to some high bids. And honestly, someone who might be out of the money at that point in June, they're going to go all in on that prospect because that's their one way to get back into the money. So I do just feel like it just levels out every league. When you run a national contest with we have 57 leagues in the main event. In the RotoWire Online Championship, we have 220, I think it is. You really have to try and make sure that each league is level. And so this rule, I just feel, is a very level playing field for all of these in a national contest.
And speaking of all the prospects, where Paul Skeens came, everything like that. We heard earlier in the podcast how well that Ariel's been pitching. Shouldn't he be in the prospect pool as well? Shouldn't he be on NFBC?
I think he's still in the minors. We just talked about the prospects, right?
So right. He hasn't played a game in the majors yet. You're right.
He's got to play 1 game in the majors. So when his cousin Steve calls him up and he goes in the relief 1 game, bango, Ariel's right in the player pool.
Got
By the
it.
way, you do know that Steve Cohen is my uncle, right?
I do not know that.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just
See?
Monkey's uncle. Yeah, sure.
All right, so you mentioned the injured list. This one I've got more gripe with.
Oh my goodness,
it's
really?
not a personal thing, obviously, but I'm of the strong opinion that not having an IL and having a limited roster spot makes it unfair. Or more unfair. I'm sure you've heard this. More unfair for players because if you have a team and you did a great job drafting and you were shrewd and you got bargains and whatever, but you got the unfortunate thing. Freddie Freeman gets hit. Ronald Acuna. We were talking right before this before we aired. Ronald Acuna gets hurt. And he's going to be out for 3 months, right? You wouldn't want to drop him onto the free agent pool. He's too valuable, and so you can say, well, it's a decision you have to make. But to be honest, I think it's sort of not as fair. You're over penalizing teams that have more injuries. I don't see it as being more shrewd. I see it as being more unlucky. I mean, last year we picked up Ryan Mountcastle and somebody else, Nolan Jones, off the waiver wire, and they were great the rest of the year. I'm like, why in the world are these guys on the waiver wire? They should not be on the waiver wire, and that helped us. I kind of think that was penalizing the other guy. So what's your take on that? Because my strong opinion is that even if you want to say, you know what, we're not going to do an unlimited IL. So make 2 IL spots, 4 spots, and then of course you have the argument that, well, we don't want to have so much penetration into the deep league. But of course the counter to that is, well, make 2 or 4 IL slots, make it 6 bench, or go down to 14 teams if you want the same level of penetration. I just see it as less fair, more luck, and I'm an actuary. I don't want to see more luck. So that's my spiel. I hope that doesn't offend you, by the way.
No, it doesn't offend me at all. I think you're in the minority in this feeling, though.
Really?
Absolutely. I think.
Oof.
Okay, so let's say you add 2. Okay, let's just count it up.
Yeah.
You add 2 DL spots. 30 teams, 15 teams, 30 rounds, 450 players. You add 2 DL spots. That's another 30 players. There's 480 players are out on week 1 because everyone's going to have 2 DL guys. Everybody would draft 2 DL guys. So you're going to have 480 players out of the pool. You just talked about how you picked up Mountcastle and somebody else that helped you last year. No way are those guys available. So you do lose Acuna. Listen, there's somebody out there now, player number 451, who still might be able to help your team. Player 481 is not helping your team. If you're talking about 4 DL spots, that's 60 players, that's 510 players, and now you're going to try to get some help during the season? Impossible. So I do not think in a 15-team format, and the idea of going down to 14 teams.
But if you have an IL guy, then you can't pick up anybody if you want to save him. So now you have it's. I'd rather have the 480. I'd rather have the 48 for 81st person than have nobody.
Well, I mean, again, this is the decisions that all of you guys make with only 7 roster spots. Do you keep that guy who got hurt? Do you pick up do you stash a minor leaguer? These are very, very tough decisions, and this is not supposed to be an easier league. I don't want this to be easy. I can just stash this guy on the DL. I draft DeGrom, right? Scherzer much earlier if you have a DL spot than right now when you draft him without a DL spot. Again, it just changes the entire context of the game, and I just think we're trying to make it tough.
No, there's no doubt that it changes the decisions, and it's a different decision. It's just more luck involved. I think that's my beef here. It's you're penalized because you're hurt. Again, it makes great decisions. You got somebody's hurt, you don't know, you have to decide. So it does make and it's for shrewd audiences, of course.
I've had this discussion with Chris Liss on RotoWire, and he was an opponent for a DL spot early, and he always said afterwards, I was so wrong. This just makes that game so much tougher. So I would love to do a poll of Fangraphs people and see. And I bet you're in the minority on this one.
Really?
But,
all right.
Listen, Ariel, luck plays into it anyway. If you draft, let's say, Francisco Lindor, you're not betting on him to bat 200 for the entire year. So there's some luck in that also. That you're betting on and hoping there's luck on each of these players, hoping that they're going to have a good season. So you're saying that there's luck involved. Yes, there's luck involved, but there's luck involved with everything. Is Max Scherzer going to
No
come back a
doubt.
certain time?
No
So
doubt.
if you're saying you want to take luck out of it, you can't take luck out of it because luck is inherent in the game itself.
Yeah, as a game operator, you can never take luck out completely. I mean, we do things to make it put more skill in your hands. We do that with the KDS. We do that with everything that we try to do. But yeah, I don't agree that DL spots would make it less lucky for anybody.
All right.
Or
Well,
more
we'll get
lucky.
some. We're gonna get some listener feedback on that as well. And of course, I work for an insurance company. It's all about managing luck, obviously.
Yes.
I do want to ask about the twice a week lineups.
Mhm.
So this is a matter of preference, and I think there's positives and negatives about it. When you have a 2 times a week lineup, you get, if a player gets injured, well, now you're only out for a couple of days, right? It's much more manageable, and it's a nice in-between play from a weekly going to a daily, where daily is quite a lot of management.
Right.
Weekly is much less. It's an in-between. But it also makes the game more about finding the playing time. It's less about the skill of the players because, if you have a $20 player, and he's only playing 2 games for the spot versus a $10 player who's playing 4 games, it's about finding the guys who are playing more games almost. It doesn't really matter even of the talent. You're sort of sifting, and it doesn't become a game of allocating talent as much as making sure, who's in Colorado this week, who's facing lefties. I like more season-long type thing. Again, this is a preference thing, just in my opinion. What's your take on that? Because obviously there's advantages because, less luck in terms of your player gets injured and, there's more flexibility. Yes, of course, there's a strategy because now you're going to have to roster some more hitters, to account. What's your take on why that came about?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about players during the week, this isn't the NBA. If you want to play a fantasy game where some guys will play 3 times in one week and other guys will play 5 times in a week, then you're talking about that. I mean, the Monday through Friday, or actually Monday through Thursday, someone's either playing 3 times or they're playing 4 times. There's nobody really only playing 2 times. It's unless there's a rain out or something like that. So I don't think you're benching a $20 hitter for a $10 hitter because he's got 1 extra game. We can talk about that later. The whole reason for the rule was, as you just said, MLB had a penchant, if you will, the teams did, for putting a player on the DL on Tuesday morning or Wednesday or Monday before the game started, and you would get a 0 for the entire week, right? Even if it was
That's
a Wednesday,
brutal.
they put them on. It was just too brutal. When you're
Yeah.
playing for high stakes, it was not good for our game. People were upset about that. So I don't know, maybe the 4th year or so, I decided we would have Friday moves for hitters and pitchers, and this would eliminate guys going on the DL, including starting pitchers who may have gone on the DL on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And so it worked out good for the hitters because I feel like people weren't really gaming the system. They were getting a player in. It also made your reserve roster spots so much more valuable because, again, you weren't stashing 2 minor leaguers because you needed a middle infielder, you needed a corner infielder, and you needed an outfielder on your bench at least, right? So it made making your bench even stronger. But what we learned after the first year of doing this was it became more of a streaming pitcher's game, right? Like if a guy was going to start his only start on Saturday, you'd put another starter in for the first part of the week, and then you could get that guy to start on Saturday as well. And so it became really a streaming pitcher's game.
Yeah.
And I admitted my mistake right away and said no more on the pitchers. But since then, we've continued to do the Friday hitters lineup, and I think it's worked pretty well.
Yeah, and no, and by the way, I'm giving a little bit of criticism or at least some questions here, but I mean, I love the NFBC format, and I think you might have found the right middle point, in terms of pitchers once a week and hitters twice a week, and that's great because I find it too much to do daily, but you want to get some of the flexibility, so I think it's great at middle point. And by the way, just to give some praise, of other stuff, I think the NFBC has really the best waiver wire out there, and the best lineup software out out there, and where you can switch positions even after a thing locks. Very great stuff, and the draft software is fantastic. So I mean, it is a fantastic place to play, and I enjoy the formats. Obviously, I play multiple contests each year, so I'm a big fan of. So not all criticism here. I'm just playing devil's advocate on some of the rules here.
No, I appreciate the conversation on all of this because, many of the suggestions that we've implemented have come from our audience. And I know you're going to ask
Right.
about that, but this is a lot of stuff. This isn't Greg Ambrosius coming up with this stuff. It's our customers saying, hey, Greg, I can't stand that my guy goes on the DL on Tuesday or Wednesday. Is there anything we could do about this?
Right,
And we
totally.
thought about it, right? And KDS was the same thing. Third round reversal in football is the same thing. The Fab software, that was definitely our guys working with D on that and really taking it to our programmers, and they just heard exactly what people were saying. I mean, it's just all of this, it really comes from our players.
And speaking of which, speaking of your customers, in what area has the clever NFBC crowd impressed you the most with their gameplay recently?
Yeah, I mean, the way you guys do Fab is just unbelievable, and that's why I say I could never compete with you guys. I mean, it's just unreal how you guys are hitting on players before anybody else sees it in the industry and such like that. The trends that happen, starting pitchers going much earlier than any other industry draft. When Labor or Tout Wars goes after NFBC, ADPs are out in their main events. You're like, what are those guys thinking? But I do think the industry has kind of followed suit with the NFBC. So that to me, just the way everybody handles Fab nowadays is just mind-boggling. I don't know how you guys do it. So that's the biggest one. To me, the one thing that has changed in our industry in the last 5-6 years that have probably benefited the NFBC more than anything are all these podcasts. And all these podcasts being done by young guys. I mean, trust me, there was a time when I thought the NFBC was growing, but half of our audience is going to die in the next decade or so. I mean, you look at CDM, Fantasy Diamond Challenge, older audience as well. But these last couple of years, I mean, look at our champions. They're like 32 years old, 31 years old. I mean, all these podcasts
Makes me
are
feel
young
old.
guys. I know it, but these young podcasts, they're just spreading the word. And I think one of the best decisions I ever made, and I did it at the Arizona Fall League, was Ron Chandler was asking me about our ADPs, if he could have an API because he wanted to use our ADPs. And I was like, you know what?
ADPs are absolute. I mean, the NFBC is absolutely
Gold
the
standard.
gold standard.
Gold
Yeah, and
standard.
I was like, so
Oh,
what we
for
used
sure.
to do was we would only give you the ADPs if you signed up for a contest, right? Because you're drafting online, you're creating the ADP. So I wanted to reward you. Sign up early, get in the draft champions, and you get the ADPs. And then I just thought when Ron asked me about that, I was like, you know what? Why don't I just give them to everybody? They're the best content out there, and it'll spread the word about the NFBC. And that's really what happened. I mean, it just took off where people started reading them. And then you could sort them by 7 days, 5 days, 3 days, whatever
Yeah.
you wanted a contest, and it's just
And the reason why it's so good, because I used to use Mock Draft Central was
for
my
sure.
source,
Right,
but
right.
that was a mock draft. When
Correct.
people are putting money in it, even if it's a small $50 draft champions, you're putting your money where your mouth is. You're going to get actual real numbers here.
Yeah.
So it's just so reliable. And when we go into drafts auctions, I mean, obviously there's going to be variation draft to draft, but
Yeah.
and there's obviously movement because of it. It's absolutely spot on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Average auction values is great. And in the online software, that average auction value is right there by the guy's sticker, if you will. And if he goes for 27 as AAV, I tell you what, he's usually going to go for 28 or 26. And if he goes for 34 and you know it, okay, there's $6 coming from somewhere else, right? So those average auction values are invaluable.
And you mentioned about the Fab. Have you seen any new trends over the past couple of years with Fab? Are people spending more, spending less, running out of money sooner, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are being better with their Fab. In the early days, guys would be out of Fab in August or whatever. Are there any $0 beds in the NFBC? No, you're supposed to manage your money better than that. I think, the big thing is people go heavy on closers, right? Which if somebody comes up as a chance for the closing role, man, he can go for $400. And so I don't think we're seeing that as much this year. But certainly that's been the trend is when a closer gets called up or gets
Yeah.
the job, man, the bids are just outrageous. So, but I do think that NFBC guys are definitely managing their fab money better. I think there's definitely groups of people who talk, obviously, right, and kind of work together on what do you think he's worth and such like that. So I just think the fab is much more scientific, if you will, which is why I could never beat you guys because you're just too damn good on all this stuff. You're not overbidding by so much. You know, we do put the runner-up bid on everything so everyone can see how much they bid and what the runner-up bid was. And I think if you look at those, you're not seeing a whole big variance like you did in the early years.
I haven't played in any leagues with you directly, Greg, although we were in an auction together where I proxied for Tim McLeod. That was in Arizona this past year. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, of course. That's the
Yeah.
XFL.
That's right. That's right. Oh, by the way, I haven't even checked. How's Tim's team doing?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I think we were middle of the pack. We got Castillo, and then we took Matt Olson, and we were hoping to trade, and we have made some trades now. I think we got 2 number 1s and 2 number 2s and 2 number 3s for next year. So
Oh,
we're
there you
definitely
go.
in a rebuilding mode, but I like what we're doing right now.
So one thing we've noticed over the past couple years is that the NFBC players and the NFBC environment is tilted much more towards more of the draft capital allocated towards pitching. That is absolutely true. I mean, if you look at playing on other different platforms around or home leagues, you'll see a much higher percentage of the allocation going to pitchers. And I think that says something about, because I know the NFBC crowd is shrewd, that they've detected that pitching is more stable or whatnot. I remember 5-10 years ago, Ruben and I we were spending way above the market on pitching, and we were doing well winning on that because we noticed guys like Kershaw, guys like Sale, they were much more reliable investments than anybody else, and so we did that. The market has caught on to that, and now it's gone that way. What do you have to say about that kind of tilt that the NFBC is above, and do you think that that's going to slide down a little bit more with a little less reliability in pitchers in general? Although Jeff Zimmerman put out something the other day that showed that the top 50 this year of pitching is way more profitable and way more reliable than it has been in a little while.
Yeah, I mean, I think NFBC owners, and I'll say, when you get to the main event, that's when you see the yellow stickers go way early in the first round, right? So I'm saying in draft champions, yes, you see a couple starting pitchers and such like that. RotoWire Online Championship, you're seeing a couple of pitchers. But when you get to the main event, when you get to the supers, the ultimates, the diamonds, the platinum, man, there's a heavy run on the yellow pitcher stickers, right? The starting pitchers. Why? Because there's only, 8-10 guys who can get 200 strikeouts. And so I think it's the reliability of those aces. I think it's the fact that you're getting good ERA whip, but the strikeouts. That's where the last couple of years it's been very hard to get 1,450 strikeouts or whatever that number is that you're going to need each year. And so if you could get 2 starting pitchers that get 210, 220, all of a sudden, you're ahead of the game there. Can you still get a 2020 guy? Maybe not, but you can get a mix of 20-plus homers. Maybe
Do you think
15.
the overall has something to do with it? With
Yeah.
because if you want to hit that overall, you're going to need to hit it, and I guess you have to do that with the pitching. Is that really
absolutely.
the reason? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to get 80% at least, right? If you're going to win the overall, 90% in each of the categories. How do you do that without getting an ace or 2 in strikeouts, right? You're chasing those Ks all year long, and they're just very hard to find. So, yeah, I think in the overall, but again, in the private leagues, the platinum, the diamond, starting pitchers just go higher than even the main event because, again, I just think the strikeouts are so hard to find when you've got good ERA and whip from that same guy, right? I mean, he's just getting you 4 categories basically, hopefully if he gets the wins. And that just sets you ahead of everybody else. And then you feel like you can find hitting. You can find a stolen base guy on waiver wire if you had to, a couple of dingers on waiver wire. But you're not going to find a 200 strikeout guy on the waiver wire, that's for sure.
So a little bit of strategy. We were talking a bit earlier about the 2 times a week lineup. Want to get your take on the actual strategy that you think should be employed here. In terms of, should we be streaming hitting? Should we be taking an extra roster spot? Should we be looking for multi-position eligible players more? Should we do we need to hold some relief pitchers so that we can stream if we don't see a good matchup for the pitchers? Like, what's the best way to make use of your lineup spots and your bench spots, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I'm probably not the right person to ask this of, but most people probably have 4 hitters and 3 pitchers on their roster, right? At max, you're stashing 1 minor leaguer, because as the season goes, you're just going to have guys that are dinged up and on the 10-day DL or IL, if you will, and so you don't just need 1 guy to come up from your bench to replace him. But like I said, I mean, I think you want a middle infielder, a corner infielder, an outfielder, 3 pitchers, and then that 4th one is up to you, right? It could be a stash of a minor leaguer. And again, as you said, you can start new hitters on the weekend. So if you got a guy who's not a very good player, but he's playing at Coors on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you put him on your bench for that, and then put him in your starting lineup if you can. But again, I'm not as much on the. I think more people are starting their best players on Monday through Thursday rather than, well, he's only got 3 games compared to 4 games. Although it's very possible that a guy will have 4 games and might get more at bats. I mean, this is all a math game anyways, right? So accumulating as many stats as possible is what you're trying to do. But for me, I think that bench spots is probably a 4-3 ratio, and I'm pretty sure it's hitters with the 4.
And how much do you look into like the lefty hitter, righty hitter splits that for the upcoming week, or team matchups, or even ballpark factor? Do you have any of those factors in play when you're figuring out your lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier to do in a 12-teamer than it is in a 15-teamer, right? Like, I mean, your bench on the 12-teamer is a starter who's probably playing a full slate that week, whereas the 15-teamer, he may not play every game. So your bench is just so much weaker on the 15-teamer. So, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, any ballpark, of course, just like Ariel was talking about. I mean, if they're playing in Colorado, you're throwing that guy in there, even if he's not as good as your starter. But again, I do think.
Thank you, Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, in the 15-team format, you really are playing your starters, I would think, most of the time. But certainly, there's some lefty-righty. The lefty-righty to me is, do they take him out if he's going up against a lefty, right? So now he's only going to play 2 games at best, or maybe only 1 game that week. Well, then you do definitely take him out. But if he has a tough lefty matchup, you probably keep him in.
Yeah. Obviously, if I use, I'm looking at the bat from Derek Carty, and he provides, weekly statistics, and that's going to take into account the lefty, righty, the ballpark. Right. I mean, he even takes into account the umpire. Right? That's crazy, but yeah, absolutely. You definitely have to take into account all that. Greg, this was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about the NFBC and answering some of my tough questions about how did this come about. But really, it was so insightful. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, and do that poll and let me know what the results are, all right?
I certainly will. All right, we'll be right back with waiver wire pitcher preview and the injury update. Stick around. All right, we're back on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. That was a great interview of Greg Ambrosius talking about the history, talking about some of the format decisions. So, really great stuff. We'll get from our audience. We'll ask you guys what you think as well, but wanted to hear it straight from the guy. Well, good stuff. I've known Greg a couple years. He's just the nicest guy. Just everything. I went to the Arizona Fall League to the First Pitch Arizona a couple years ago, and I spent like the whole day with him. I came a day early and saw him in the lobby. Hey, going to the game? Yeah, you want to get in the car? Let's go. And I just spent the whole day with him. Really, really great guy.
And getting to hear the whole backstory, it's very interesting how everything started. And it's kind of how you picture it started. It started out very small, then started out bigger, and obviously got influenced by football because football is a lot bigger in fantasy than baseball right now. So it obviously got influenced by that, and all of a sudden it just blew up to where it is. So it's just really interesting to hear the background and where it came from.
Yeah, so we normally do include the guest in our waiver wire picks, but for obvious reasons, we didn't do that for this episode, as he is, the head of a major platform. So it'll just be me and Ruvain. Ruvain, why don't you go first? Who are your waiver wire picks for this coming week?
Okay, I got three guys. First of all, I'm going to mention Heliot Ramos. He's on the Giants, who I had in one league already, and I dropped this past week, which I shouldn't have done because of a roster crunch. But this week he had 3 home runs, batted 350, and with Jung Ho Lee out, his playing time is a lot higher now, especially now that Luis Matos was sent down. Even with Conforto back, Heliot Ramos is still batting second in that lineup. He's only 19% owned in CBS, and he's the hot guy right now, the outfield guy. If you need an outfield guy, he's a definite guy. I may have to re-pick him up in the league I dropped him. I hope he's not too expensive. And the next guy I want to mention is IKF, Isaiah Kiner Falefa. In the last 2 weeks, he's batted 326 with 2 homers, a stolen base, and 7 runs. But the most impressive stat is that he's only had 3 strikeouts in his last 46 at-bats, which means he's making contact, he's getting on base, and he's available in most leagues, and he's multi-position eligible in a lot of leagues, so he's a guy to look for as well. And another guy I want to mention, he's one of my favorites, is Yenier Cano as a reliever. He's only allowed 1 run since May 23rd. He's had 4 holds, if your league has that, and he has 7 Ks over the last 2 weeks. 4 holds and 7 Ks over the last 2 weeks. He's only 28% owned in CBS, and with Craig Kimbrell as a closer, I don't know how comfortable people are with Kimbrell as a closer. I mean, he is sort of effective, but he's blown his own fair share of games, so Cano is always usually the next guy up, as we spoke about in other podcasts.
So I got a couple guys. The first one we mentioned last week, Mark Vientos, still just 40% owned. He's got the same power pace as you mentioned, Heliot Ramos. He has 5 homers in just 66 at-bats. Actually, it's even better than Heliot Ramos. He's batting .333 on the year. He's at a 40-homer pace with full season at-bats. And check out this 20% strikeout rate, 10% walk rate, 12% barrel rate. What's not to like? Everything he's done so far has been really good. You gotta pick him up. I mean, if you're in any format, even 12-team leagues, I'd consider him right now.
And he's got the full-time job now with Brett Beatty, on the shuttle back and forth in AAA. So he's got the full-time job.
They should have just kept him there all year. He was doing great in AAA. He's back now, so pick him up. This is a definite pickup. Edmundo Sosa, this is much deeper, but he is scrappy. He has 4 homers, 2 stolen bases. He is batting almost 300 in just 100 at-bats. Short-term fill-in, you got to see if he's getting playing time, but for deeper leagues, he is interesting to have. Brendan Rodgers, I mentioned before very briefly, he's under 20% owned. You have to see when he plays in Colorado because he does much better at home. This year, he's batting .314 at home. He's a .300 hitter at home for his career. Overall, he's .274 for the year. Just 3 homers this year so far. But, in a deeper league, is a 15-homer, .275 hitter useful where you can stream him in the home park? We know it's much better. Yes, it is. So Brendan Rodgers is worth looking at in deeper leagues. And I'll mention Henry Davis. He was a hot commodity earlier in the year. Has catcher eligibility. He struggled, sent down, but he's back. Big prospect, big pedigree. 2 catcher leagues, not 1 catcher league yet, but you should take a look at Henry Davis. Anything else to add, Ruven?
Nope, I think those are the guys we're looking at, and I really like the Mark Vientos because I don't know about you, but I'm watching most of the Met games, and he's even getting lucky. I mean, he's dribbling the ball and he's beating the ball out, and he's not that fast. And he wasn't played in the beginning of the season because of his defense. They were scared that he couldn't play defense, but you can't keep that bat out of the lineup.
Yeah, that's I don't know why the Mets did for that long. He came up very briefly early in the year, was amazing, and they sent him down. I mean, we trying to lose here, Mets? Steve, come on. All right, pitcher preview, Ruvain. Who you got for pitchers pick up?
Well, I think this week it may be the week to play as many middle relievers as possible. I don't like really many of the matchups going out there. There's one guy who I want to highlight, and that's Miles Michaelis. He's had 3 straight quality starts, and he's a possible 2-start this week at versus Pittsburgh against Paul Skeens, who may only go 5 or 6 innings, and then at the Cubs. So those 2 starts are pretty good, and his last 3 starts he's been pretty good, and he's available in most leagues. But otherwise, I think this is going to be the week of playing the middle relievers, because I just don't love many of the matchups out there.
Yeah, I don't like Michaelis for Roto, but for points leagues, looks like he's got through the crappy part of his year. Then I do think that's interesting for that. Mentioned a couple guys, Tyler Miguel. If you haven't picked him up yet, we mentioned him last week. 2 start this week versus Miami and San Diego at home. those are good plays, especially that Miami one. So I'd pick him up and play him this week, probably even in 12-team formats. Ryan Weathers, he's been very good at times this year. At New York and then versus St. Louis the next week. I think those could be decent. Ryan Weathers is interesting. Frankie Montas, he's less than 50% owned. He should be more owned than that. Playing at Milwaukee this week, but I think he's a good long-term addition. Looks like he's figured out something lately. And I'll mention one more. Bailey Falter, Pittsburgh. He's only given up more than 3 runs a game this year, just once. He typically lasts 6 or 7 innings, and he's getting some strikeouts lately. He's at St. Louis this week, and then the following week to start at home against Cincinnati and Tampa Bay. I think he's interesting. So, Bailey Falter, give him a look. We're talking deeper leagues, of course, here, but that is interesting to me.
Yep, and it's never too early to look at the 2-start guys. You mentioned Tyler McGill. I actually like his running mate there, David Peterson, for this week. He's actually facing the Marlins, and he pitched really well this past week. When he his last couple of starts, he's actually pitching pretty well, coming off of hip surgery. He's looking good. He's so far for this year, he's got a 3.09 ERA. He's got only 5 strikeouts and 11 2/3 innings, but he's going to be stretched out, and he's playing the Marlins next week, so that's an option as well.
And unlike Ariel Cohen, they are available in the
Eligible.
NFBC format to pick up. By the way, I was not eligible to be picked up preseason. I didn't want to tell Greg that, but there was no player page for Ariel Cohen. What gives, Greg? What gives?
I don't know.
All right, injury update, Ruvain. Go for it.
All right, we're going to start with a favorite of the podcast here, Kerry Carpenter. Carpenter was placed on the IL originally with lumbar spine inflammation. He's now been diagnosed with a lumbar spine stress fracture. His absence may be a long one now, and we may be able to count his absence in months as opposed to weeks.
Oh, so get rid of now in 15-team leagues is what you're
It's very possible because no one's picking him
Ooh.
up in the next couple of weeks. He's not a guy you really want to stash, so he may be a guy you want to drop. Matt Vierling has been getting a lot of playing time. Akil Baddoo is getting playing time as well. Another injury guy, Lars Nootbaar. He was placed on the IL with an oblique strain. Cardinals manager Ali Marmol said that Nootbaar is expected to miss several weeks. While he's out, Alec Burleson should be the everyday right fielder, but Matt Carpenter may get some more time at DH. They're all friends out there. Wilyer Abreu, I think that's how it's pronounced. Wilyer Abreu from the Boston Red Sox was placed on the IL with a right ankle sprain. He thinks that it's only going to be a minimum 10-day stay, so hopefully that's the case. In the meantime, Tyler O'Neill was activated, and he's back in the lineup, so it's a matter of finding time for Abreu when he does come back. Francisco Alvarez, he underwent thumb surgery April 23rd for the torn UCL in his thumb. He has begun a rehab assignment. He is hitting, and he even caught a no-hitter in Single-A Brooklyn this past week, at full 9 innings. So he's not coming back for this weekend. This weekend the Mets are in London. Then he's not going to come back there, but there's a good chance he can be back by the end of next week or even the beginning of next week. And I usually try to end on a positive note, but I'm going to end on a negative note this week. Christian Javier, Tyler Wells, John Means, Jose Urquidy, they are all set or already had Tommy John surgery in the next week or two. So if you have them in any type of league, they are all droppable. They probably won't even be available and eligible to pitch until probably the end of next year.
Yeah, I have Christian Javier in Tout Wars, but it's unlimited IL, so you're just going to sit on my IL all year. No reclaim for him. So
No.
And Byron Buxton, healthy, although in his last 8 games, 1 time on base, 1 hit, no walks, 1 RBI. He's batting .043 with a 42% strikeout rate. I guess he's not injured, but I think the Twins could play somebody better than that.
Well, maybe he's just knocking the rust off. But I have a question for you. Who do you think is going to go on the IL sooner this year, if at all? I mean, I hope they don't, but who do you think will? Byron Buxton or Giancarlo Stanton?
Stanton looks good this year. Looks healthy, no?
He looks healthy, but knowing his quote-unquote injury pedigree, do you think that he's going to stay healthy? I mean, he is running differently. You can see the way he runs bases, and he's definitely running at a slower pace, and the Yankees are controlling everything like that. With these injury guys, I mean, it's so hard to tell when something's going to crop up. But
I mean, Stanton, do you know how many games he's played in the outfield this year?
how many?
I guess.
I'm going to say 30.
Oh, boy, no. A little bit lower than that.
A little bit lower? 22.
I meant a lot lower than that.
5.
Less.
Okay, then they're doing the right thing. If that's the
Zero.
case,
Zero, Ruvain. He has not
even-
played a game in the outfield this year.
even though they said he was going to play the outfield this
And
year.
Byron
which-
Buxton is playing center field every day. So to me, the answer is who's going to go. I would actually put my money on Buxton going
then
back
you're
to the
correct.
IL.
Then I take that back. It's going to be Byron Buxton 100%, no question.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
And Stanton's having a lot better year than Buxton is.
Yes. But weren't they going around the same price in draft day, or you think Stanton was going a little more? Stanton was going more?
Buxton was going way cheaper.
Really?
They both
Okay.
were. The Stanton was very cheap this year. By the way, Stanton has 15 homers this year,
Yes.
36 RBIs. He was definitely underpriced this year. Buxton was overpriced.
As usual.
He was worth $1, and he's worth negative.
Yeah.
Stanton is worth a lot. So, yeah, there you go. That is the story for today. Hope you guys enjoyed our NFBC podcast with the man himself, Greg Ambrosius. Ruvain, what's going on with you? Why don't you tell the audience where we can see your stuff?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come on a daily basis. You can also catch my weekly article on Rotoballer discussing all the injuries I mentioned, plus many more.
And my name's Ariel Cohen. I'm over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer. We got ATCNY on the X Twitter machine, whatever you want to call it, and Beat the Shift podcast each and every week over here. Cruising through June. You know, we just passed our magical date, June 5th, my dad's birthday. Happy birthday, Dad. 81 years young, not bad. And that's the date that I always look at the standings, and it's correlated, or at least it's somewhat predictive of the final standings. So take a look at your standings, folks, and see where you're in. And if you're lower down, take some more risks. If you are higher up, de-risk as much as you can. Trade away 1 for 2 and stuff like that. But doing well. All right, Ruvain, that's it for our show. Once again, thank you so much to Greg Ambrosius of the NFBC for coming on. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.